Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. Today is episode number 69. We're back after a short hiatus where I was actually in Italy for over a month. And so I probably could have done the show from there, but I decided to enjoy eating pasta every single day instead. Today, for episode 69, I'm really excited because we have on our show today Manpreet Dhami, who is a managing director at Newland Chase, which is a large global immigration firm. And among the things that Manpreet oversees is Newland Chase's immigration strategy. And part of that, of course, is their technology stack. So we're going to get into, Manpreet's story, how her family immigrated to the UK, and her sort of personal connection to the immigration space, and then talk about sort of her career and starting at what became Newland Chase eventually, and now kind of ending back there. And of course, what's really interesting to me, and hopefully to all of us, is going to be talking about the technology that Newland Chase uses. Their product is called ImmiSMART, and we'll get into all of that. I'm really excited. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. I know I mentioned that I'm the founder of GMI Rocket and the co-founder of Laborless, which is a immigration startup that automates H-1B compliance. So without further ado, I'm very excited to have Manpreet on. So Manpreet, thank you so much for joining, all the way also from UK, might I add. And I know it's pretty late there, so I really appreciate you kind of taking the time and staying up a little late.
Yeah, I cannot lie. I would have rather this were not 9 p.m. on Friday night, so I could enjoy a glass of wine, but I am nevertheless delighted to be here.
Well, now that I think about it, we should have prepped and both had glasses of wine and have it together. It's only 4:00, but it's also Friday, so it's all good here in New York. Well, yeah, thank you. I really do appreciate you, taking the time and being here. So thanks for that. I love to. I hope I gave a quick summary of your background and it did it sort of justice. But I know, of course, that's what we're going to dive into, and we'll of course get to everything you do at Newland Chase and sort of everything the company does as an organization from an immigration standpoint and from a technology standpoint. But as always, what's really fascinating to me, in addition to that, is the guest's sort of background and life story. I think learning about how you get to where you are is just as interesting and important as what you do today, right? Our lives are also what we've done in the past and sort of the decisions we've made. So I'm really excited to get into that. Before we do, just as a shout out to everyone watching, please give yourselves a shout out. Let us know who you are, where you are in the world, perhaps. I know there's a lot of folks joining, hopefully from your firm and from your team. So I'm really excited for, to have everyone from all sorts of offices around the world. Tell us what you do. And of course, as we go along, please ask questions. It's going to be really interesting to have this conversation be kind of fluid and natural. And actually, we already have a bunch of comments coming in. So Katya says, can't wait to hear it all. Thank you, Katya, for your comment. Rigoberto says kudos, and absolutely, especially again for being up so late. Daniel says very exciting times at Newland Chase. Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Susan says hello from New York. Looking forward to this conversation. So thank you, Susan. Thank you for always being here and supporting the show. Sue Young says big kudos, Manpreet. Excited for the session. Me too. Cassandra, hello from sunny Florida.
Yeah, this is the woman who is to blame for my late.
Well, thank you, Cassandra, and Rob Morehouse, who I actually met Rob recently at the Worldwide ERC conference. Oh my God, we got a ton of comments coming in. Hey Rob. Richard says hi. Hey, back to you, Richard. Marianne, I'm live from sunny San Francisco. Yes, I did cut my hair. Thank you. It's actually nice to not have it up again. So thanks again, Marianne, for joining. Hey, Lachi from St. Louis. Okay. Oh, hey, yeah. Hey, Susan. Hey, Cindy from. Okay, this is. I know I'm bad. I know I'm an American. It's Gloucestershire, right? Gloucestershire. I was, but at least I didn't say Gloucester. I didn't say. So hey, Cindy, thank you for joining. Hey, Ian, glad to be back. All right, so keep the comments coming. I'll stop and sort of address them as we go. I know this is going to be a really lively conversation, but obviously I want to get to our chat with you, Manpreet. So Manpreet, I want to I love starting and like learning about the background of each guest. And I think if I understand you correctly, your family moved to the UK, which is where you currently are, from India. Were you born in the UK after your family moved, or were you born outside of the UK and moved with them?
No, I was born in the UK.
Got it. So do you know? I mean, so I came to the US when I was 2, right? So I'm an immigrant, but my memories really are from the US, and it's a really interesting kind of tug of war of like, where am I from? Where do I belong? I also imagine, even if you grow up, like you in the UK, you're still immigrant household. Like your cultural ties are both in both places. I don't know. What do you like remember about like the sort of immigrantness of your home, if you will?
Well, my parents are probably quite atypical Indians, Indian immigrants, in the sense that my father, if you ever ask my father where he was born, he will tell you United India. And that means he was born before the partition. He was born in 1940. And 7 years later, when India gained its independence, he was one of those families that sadly had to do that awful journey, because where they're from in India is the Punjab, and the Punjab was one of those places that had sort of a quite arbitrary line drawn through the middle of it. Half of it went into Pakistan, the other half landed in India, and of course then along cultural, or rather religious sort of divides, you were asked to relocate to one side or the other. So my parents being Sikh, they moved their whole, and my father's family at the time, moved their entire life across from the Pakistani side of Punjab, left everything they owned and had, and were resettled on the Indian side of the Punjab. And luckily, they were resettled very well. But that was the start of a journey, I suppose, for him. During the 1960s, when, probably actually after the Second World War, Britain was suffering a massive labour shortage, calling out to all of their colonies to have them, fill their labour shortage. And that's sort of the wave that my father came in on to the UK. He arrived in 1963 to probably what I would describe as quite a hostile United Kingdom, a welcome at the time. It wasn't the place it is today, which is quite inclusive. Suffered a lot of racism when he first arrived. Some of the stories, I was always fascinated as a child when he told us the stories of, what he did and where he went, and the sort of signs he saw up on doors outside of places, which, to be fair, is not unique to Indians. The Irish that lived in the UK at the time suffered quite a lot of racism as well. So that's how he arrived. He then, like every immigrant, found the Indian community, who gave him some support, put him on his feet, gave him his first job, and essentially has just worked incredibly hard. And with my mother, who later joined him, we were born in the UK, my siblings and I, and that's kind of his story. But as a result, I wonder whether it's as a result of this, but I've always had a great desire to know the world. So aside from my parents' journey to the UK, I've got my own, I suppose, little journey in terms of moving around, and quite recently became a French citizen. I'm very proud of. So yeah.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Actually, I think I might have it sitting around on my desk. I was very excited. I went and collected it the other day. Look, let me show you.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I'm very delighted to have it.
I always, whenever I just came back from Italy yesterday, and I always love looking around waiting online to go through customs at all the different passports. Everyone's got a different color, a different like crest on the front. It's really cool. A lot of the Middle Eastern passports are beautiful, like these green shades. I mean, I'm so used to kind of this like ugly dark blue of the US. I love it. I'm proud of it, but it's So, and what did your, just out of curiosity, I mean, I know you said your father came and it was obviously difficult. What was he able to do kind of work-wise when he did come?
So it's funny. It's an interesting question, because I think, I've often asked my parents about, what were you doing? What were your lives like in India? And I think my father would have been a teacher had he stayed in India. But obviously, he left in the middle of his studies, did not complete those when he came to the UK, because it was all about, making a life, making money. And so he largely worked in manufacturing, in factories, doing quite difficult jobs, essentially, to provide for us. And quite frankly, my older sister is a PhD doctorate, who's done incredibly well for herself. My brother as well. So I think they did a fine job with instilling the value of education and hard work in us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. When you were younger, do you feel like that was the case? I mean, just knowing a lot of, at least my friends who come from the Indian community, like there is there's a value of education, but there's also a quite active push towards education. I think for me, like the Russian, I should say former Soviet Jewish community in America is very similar. On Sunday mornings, I would go to math school when my friends were home, watching cartoons, and they were drilling, formulas that I hadn't even learned in regular school yet. And obviously I think that does imprint on something on you as a child. Did you have any of that?
Absolutely not. So when I said they were atypical in the sense that we never landed in an Indian community. Actually, my brother, sister, and I, we all went to Catholic school, because it was the closest school to our home. We were obviously not. We partook in mass and Catholic education, but we didn't take communion, etc. And that was really down to my father wandering down to school, speaking to the headmaster, and sort of saying, look, this is the closest school to my home, and I work shifts, and my wife is now working, and we want to ensure that our children are safe and can make it to school and back. And it's, I look fondly back on that time that, our headmaster became a bit of an unpaid babysitter to the three of us. He'd keep us in school. But, in terms of encouraging, Sandy Casey, or Cassandra, as you called her earlier, she asked me this question shortly after I joined Newland Chase, just about a year ago, and she said, how, I've got young children. What did your parents tell you? What did they instill in you that you really, you focused on your studies? And I said, actually, my parents are quite bright. Actually, I have no memory of them ever telling any one of us to do our homework. But they quietly made us understand that an education would be very important to us. And it was the one thing that nobody could ever take away from us. It was for us and us alone. And my father would quite often say things like, well, if you don't want to study, that's absolutely fine. You can come and work in a factory like me, if that's what you would like to do. So there were very clever little messages that were positioned that made you think, well, that doesn't sound like it's much fun, really, working shifts in a factory. And I think we just loved school, all of us. So it kind of came naturally.
That's clever, I think.
Very clever.
Because I think sometimes when parents push too much, and I don't have children of my own, but I was a child at some point. I think all of us were. If I'm not mistaken, I think all of us were kids at some point. You kind of resent pushing of any sort, when you're a kid. And anyone else could tell you that it's a great idea, but if your parents tell you, God forbid, that's like, right. So it's actually really, it's really cool. I will say though, that I think just the conversation I've had with just immigrants in general, around the world, in the US, elsewhere, there's a fear that you come to this country, and if you don't already have money somehow, right, that you might work a kind of lower paying job, let's say, and you want to make sure your kids have a better income. I mean, you say standard of living, but often that translates into income opportunities. And so the push there is because I think a lot of parents understandably are worried that if they don't, the kids might just, not go the route that the parents are hoping for. But it's a lot of confidence that your parents had in you and your siblings, and which I think is really cool. So not
to say they didn't have their strange ways of convincing us of the route we wanted to take. I remember my best friend in primary school, randomly one day told me she wanted to be a nurse. I didn't even really understand what a nurse was, but I decided to go home and tell my father I wanted to be a nurse. And he very gently, not so gently now that I understand what he's playing at, but, discouraged me from this route in life by saying, really? Oh, well, that's lovely, dear. Do you want to clean up people's vomit when they're ill? Would you really like to wipe their bottom? I was thinking, no, this sounds awful. All of this sounds terrible. Why would I want to do it? And why does my friend want to do this? So I was quickly put off a career in nursing.
I never knew that that's what it entails. And by the way, shout out to any
significantly more than that, and it's
yeah.
So it was reduced to possibly the worst possible elements of it.
Right. That's where them being clever comes in. That's awesome. So I want to kind of fast forward a little bit, because I think, just to kind of understand, you ended up obviously not becoming a nurse, or going into the medical profession, I suppose. When you went to university, did you know what you wanted to do? I mean, you said you had a fascination with other cultures, or sort of traveling, knowing the world. Was that on your mind at all when you were kind of deciding your professional path?
No, not at all. And certainly when I went to university, I just continued a path that I had already been on, probably since secondary school. So in the UK, you're quite quickly, I think, pushed down a specific path, because you do A levels, and A levels really determine sort of what you potentially can do at university. So I just happened to be, I had a secondary school that was incredible. It had some amazing language teachers, and I, really enjoyed those classes. So I decided then for my A levels to study French, German, and English, but obviously it was English literature more than anything else. So by the time I completed those A levels, for me, it was, well, obviously French and German is what I'm going to study at university. And again, it was one of those things that, I guess, unlike, I think, parents who just do desperately want their children to do well, really kind of, and I think, a lot of other Indian parents, and I know a lot of Indian parents who will, strongly encourage their children down a medical route, or, be an engineer, or, one of these other professions. My parents always said to me, do what you love, because if you do what you love, then you're very likely to be successful. And I did. I absolutely loved studying languages. So I did a joint honours degree in French and German, without really thinking at all about what that could lead to, if anything. And at the end of it, discovered that perhaps it wasn't the most useful degree to do. Especially at that time in the UK, when we had so many people who were trialing. Well, obviously European Union. There was a lot of migration, free movement, and by the time I graduated, I was like, great. So I speak two European. Well, in addition to English, I speak these two other European languages. Well, that's pretty common. Everybody does. So that's how I finished my degree, and then, as a result of this, in quite a random thought process, I then decided what would be the answer to this problem was to learn a more complicated / rarer language that might be of use to me. And so I actually moved to Japan, and I spent 2 years on a program called the Japan Exchange Teaching Program, which is, as it's a teaching program that you go into, in my case, English intensive schools, secondary schools, and you also work with the Board of Education to foster better relations and international relations with Japan. And it was amazing. I also studied Japanese during the time that I was there, and passed a few exams. And it was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. But it was, I guess, when I look back at it now, it was absolute youth and foolishness, because I didn't speak a word of Japanese, didn't know a single person there. Just thought, oh, well, yes, that seems like a good idea. I'll just go and do this.
How was your Japanese after you finished those 2 years?
So it was, I could absolutely live my life there, get about, do everything I needed to. When I returned, I actually ended up working for a Japanese trading company, who put me on site at Toyota and they hired me primarily because they needed, as they said, it was in a sales engineer role, not one I applied for. Again, a bit of a haphazard incident in my life where I went for a temping role, and it turned into a full-time job offer where they said, look, you know, you speak French and we need somebody on site at Toyota France. So, you know, how about we give you this other job, and we give you a car, and we give you a phone, and you train here, and then you go over there. And I was like, well, this sounds fabulous. Why would I not do it? So yeah, I mean, it's probably the best part of 15 years I haven't properly used it, but it's there somewhere. As you probably know, languages, you know, when you use them again, they come back.
Yeah. Wow. So your first kind of, other than the teaching opportunity, which of course is a full-time job, but your sort of first corporate or working for an employer type of job was using two languages that you learned, not even your primary English language.
Yeah, indeed.
Wow. And so, I mean, if you ask me, well, first of all, you probably know, coming from the US, yes, we study other languages, but not nearly to the extent of folks who are in the European Union, just because you sort of need multiple languages to get by professionally. Whereas here it's like, well, everyone sort of speaks English, which I studied Spanish for a very long time. I'm decent at it. I can also live there and get by, but I'm by no means, professionally fluent. So I always respect and admire people whose work requires them to use learned languages, because to me that is just unbelievably impressive. So that's super cool. I'm just curious, before I ask my next question, which of those languages I'm assuming French, I guess, because you just recently became a French citizen, and
which of them do I speak the best?
Best today, yeah.
So my first language was Punjabi. So before I even went to school or nursery, obviously, that was the language I spoke. So it would probably be between French and Punjabi. And I'd say probably French has the edge because I studied it, whereas Punjabi, you just grow up and you live in the environment you live in. So I often say to my parents, it's like, yeah, it's great until, I went on a trip with my parents, maybe 5-6 years ago to India. And it was during the Indian elections. At the time, the TV was on all the time. I was like, oh, those are words I have never heard in my life, because I don't have a political conversation with my parents. It's kind of like pass the bread or something like that.
Make your bed.
Exactly. So that kind of complex vocabulary I have in the French language, but probably don't in Punjabi.
Fascinating. I'm kind of the same in Russian, but I've been actively better at that, or trying to get better at that, by reading more and listening to the news more, especially. That's cool. So you worked at Toyota, and I'm curious. So now you've clearly lived around the world. I mean, you lived in Japan. Now you lived on site, were you living in France for?
Well, so as part of my degree, I lived joint honours degree. I lived for 4 months in Germany, in Dortmund, which I describe as the Birmingham of Germany, an industrial sort of city, huge, lovely, great people, but not particularly pretty. And then I went from there to probably one of the most beautiful places, I think, in France, Strasbourg, on the French-German border. And so that was my year abroad. And then, after I graduated, I lived in Japan. And then that first job took me back to France, but the north of France, I was living in Lille.
Mm-hmm. So you've sort of started to fulfill this idea of having this like worldly career. How did you then transition from that to your first job in the sort of global mobility immigration space? Because you've obviously made a really amazing career out of that over the past decade or so. But before that, you could have gone into a global ops role. I mean, you could have kind of done a lot of different things, given the skills, the language skills, and the experience you had. What sort of drew you to that first job? And can you talk a little bit about that transition and maybe that first role?
So it's not going to be as lofty, perhaps, as you might imagine. So it turns out, after I am now working as a sales engineer, that I'm not particularly passionate about engineering. And having, as part of the year and a half that I did it, even being sent to Nagoya, so sort of Toyota City, to have some sort of engineering education, I was like, I cannot spend my life doing this. Even if I can learn it, I don't enjoy it. And happened to be just sort of thinking about, okay, what else I could do. Joined some recruitment agencies at the time, kind of all the ones that had any language aspect to them, because there's some very specialized agencies that deal with linguists, and came across a teeny tiny ad that I had no understanding of what the actual job was, but it said something along the lines of languages are desirable. So on the basis of said advertisement, I decided to apply for the job, and that job turned out to be my first job in mobility or in immigration with Emigra. They had just opened up their first, their international offices. They'd opened, I think, Hong Kong a few months prior, and London was the ones shortly after that. I was one of the very first employees in London.
Wow. And so at that time, was Emigra a fairly small company?
Tiny, yeah. It had its Houston office, which probably was reasonably sizable, but outside of that, it had a very small presence in Hong Kong. And at the time that I joined Emigra, they had a wonderful woman called Hilary Sloan, who had transferred from Houston to sort of set it up and hire and get people trained. And she hired somebody who I now work with again, another wonderful woman who I knew at the time was Marianne Chapman, now Marianne Fry, and I was then the second hire in that office. So it was a very, very small office. They need to grow, right?
Right. And now that I think about it from an immigration standpoint, this person who came in from Houston came probably on some sort of intra-company transfer to set up the office. So can you talk a little bit about that job, because you clearly did not hate it and you've stayed in the industry. So like what about it? Okay, it said languages preferred. What happened? Like, what did you actually do?
So I started in global immigration, and what I loved about that is it was so international. So it really was, you learned about customer service, you learned how to communicate with people. I like people, like, as you've seen, I like to talk. So it was really kind of playing to the things that I enjoy doing, interacting with people. I like writing, I like problem solving, and then working with an international network of partners that really helped us decipher how we could get somebody from A to B. And so I remember working with a partner, particularly this woman comes to mind because she was an absolute genius at French immigration law, but she was of a certain age, and you could not send her an email. If you wanted a question answered, you had to call her or you had to send a fax. Those were the only two methods of communication. And this was, I'm old, but this was in 2003, 2004. So, it was like, really? This is how we have to communicate to get an answer to this question? But it was just a group of, I suppose, people that I worked with at the time, and the partners largely that we interacted with, that made it feel, it was just a really rewarding job. You were helping people, and I was enjoying getting to know people around the world.
Did you end up using your language skills, to talk to people who are trying to move from all over? Yeah.
I always tend to let the other person decide. And I do this because when I was learning French and German, nothing infuriated me more than, wandering into a place and somebody, finding out you were English and deciding that they wanted to practice their English. I think, no, I came here to learn German. Speak to me in German. I don't want to practice English. So I do tend to let other people decide, if it's one of the languages I speak, whether they want to speak to me in that language or not.
That's actually interesting. Do you ask them what's better, like what language you prefer, or how do you?
No, I let them start, and then usually during the course of the conversation, at some point it will come out, and if they switch, I'm happy for them to switch, and if they don't, I'm happy to carry on in English. I have actually our EVP at Newland Chase, Florent Frappoli, who is French, but he's like the least French person in the world. I don't think I've ever exchanged a word with Florent in French ever. And because he's just, he's also had an international career, and he's never ever. I'd almost be shocked to hear him speak French. I've really never seen it happen.
That's so interesting. I feel like there's almost an art form there of figuring out what the best language is to talk to somebody especially when you have so many languages at your disposal in a very proficient way. You can always default to your kind of, native language that you grew up speaking, because that's probably the easiest. But to your point, if you're trying to talk about pass the salt, at the dinner table, Punjabi would be easy. But if you're trying to, have a conversation about
conversation,
yeah,
you're going to start using English words in those
right, exactly. Sure. That's so cool. So I want to move ahead a little bit, because I know that your journey, you worked at Emigra for some years, yes. And then you moved on. You worked at some other organizations overseeing or in the immigration space, and you ended up, and then Emigra was acquired, right, by CIBT Newland Chase, and then sort of you ended up back there now. So it's kind of cool that you came full circle. But before we get to that, I'm just curious, and we don't have to go through, of course, every job you've done and all that, but I'm curious, sort of, how did your, like, what when you reflect back a little bit on the progression of your career from that first job, where you were, yes, leveraging languages, but you were now going into this absolutely new field, I think, from your perspective, to ending up where you are today, sort of like, what do you think some of the things you've taken away from the different organizations you worked at? What do you think those things are that have been important to you and have sort of kept you in the industry?
Well, I mean, I think I was very lucky to land at Emigra at the time I did, because, I mentioned earlier, you join at that time, and then you have so many opportunities ahead of you, because as they grow, they need to promote and encourage people to take greater responsibility. And I think from my time then, I was there for 7 years. So it wasn't an insignificant amount of time. It was, really helping that expansion. So they went from 2 international offices when I started to, by the time I'd left, God, they probably had, I was responsible for, opening pretty much all of their European offices. So yeah, they probably worldwide probably had 10, 12 offices by that stage by the time I left. And yeah, that what I learned from that time at Emigra more than anything is, I have no delusions of grandeur. I don't think it's because I'm better than anybody else or I'm brighter than anybody else. I was in the right place at the right time, and I was prepared to roll up my sleeves and work hard. And, I have memories of when I actually was transferred to Switzerland with Emigra to open up their Swiss office, kind of thinking, I don't even, like, I was setting up the office. I had to do everything, when you have to wear every cap. You're the IT person, you're the manager, you're also, taking deliveries, you're literally doing everything, kind of crawling around on the floor underneath a desk, trying to make computers work, thinking, wow, like, why am I doing this? I wouldn't even do this at home. I'd make my husband do this for me. But it is, I guess it is about throwing yourself into something, however scary it may be, and just, trying hard, really. So, and it was a great foundation. I think Emigra had probably one of the best induction trainings I've witnessed in all of my jobs, really. Really solid foundation to being able to be successful in every job thereafter. So yeah, that's how I ended up in Switzerland. And after 7 years, I felt like I'd done, I'd become that person where the company's collective memory, I suppose, where people would say, oh, if you can't find anybody else to answer the question, then ask Manpreet. So I thought it was probably time to move on, vacate my seat at the table. Quite accidentally, I met, CEO of one of Switzerland's largest providers of relocation solutions, and they had been my client, had been selling them immigration services, and so I met the CEO at some networking event, and he convinced me that he wanted to insource rather than outsource immigration, and could I come along and set up an immigration department and also join their executive management team and take over the destination service side of the business. So that for me was like, wow, that'll be something new, something more than just immigration. It's a wider mobility industry. The company at the time was called Packimpex, and also had a large household goods arm, temporary living, etc. So it was like my first induction into the wider world of mobility. And that was, again, it was, I suppose, the learning of new things, you know. And I honestly I genuinely had no idea what destination services were before I was given sort of 8 destination service offices in Switzerland. I was like, you know, and I remember the lovely guy who reported into me, who was trying to explain it to me. I was like, so what do you do exactly? How do you do it? How does this work? What, you get in cars, you drive people around, you show them houses. But again, you know, what I took away from that role was, I mean, obviously I met some amazing people in Switzerland. I've been living in Switzerland for several years before that, but they became, I think it was with Emigra, that was the job that I guess I truly got to know Switzerland and fell in love with Switzerland. And, you know, the organization itself, if you've ever worked, if you know any Swiss Germans, it's the most direct cultural environment that you can work in. And yeah, my CEO was, you know, he was 2 point, and he, you know, he kept certainly the Brits in his business. 2 point, you know, he'd often say, can you stop with this waffling? What is it you're trying to tell me? Stop, you know, pussyfooting around with all these words. What is it you want me to do? Or what is it that you want? So yeah, no, again, great learning experience. And of course, for me, back again in an environment where I could use my languages, both of them. Yeah, it was great. But again, got to a point where I was like, my job here is done. There are all these amazing people who should have an opportunity to do my job, and I probably need to move along. And so I decided to quit my job without a job. I decided I'd worked very, very hard for a very long time and deserved a break. And I took 6 months off. And well, I intended to take 6 months off. I ended up, I think, including a move from Switzerland back to London, I ended up taking probably about 5 months off, because now a very, very good friend, I'd already known her from the industry for some time. She was one of my clients at Packimpex and called me, and as soon as she was told that I was leaving and offered me a job immediately after I decided I was going to take my break, I politely told her that was not going to happen because I wanted to take my break. But, you know, she could call me back in 6 months if she wanted to. So she periodically called back. And yeah, she got me, I guess, at that 5 month stage, and I agreed to move back to the United Kingdom. And, you know, part of that was also for my parents. They're not getting any younger, and I wanted to be a little bit closer to home. And that's when I joined, you know, BGRS, Relocation Management Company. And again, it was, you know, just learning another side of this wonderful industry that we work in called mobility. And I think for me, you know, I'll only ever be in any job for as long as I'm learning something and for as long as I feel like I'm adding value. And you know, that typically tends to be around the 7-year mark. But, you know, if my job there is done sooner, then, you know, it wouldn't frighten me to move on.
You know, a couple of things that struck me there. The first one is that when you moved to Packimpex.
Yeah, Packimpex. Yeah.
Packimpex.
It was also called Network Relocation. It was another one of those companies that rebranded. Yeah.
Interesting. It's a I mean, cool mouthful. I mean, if I'm being honest, but would be
Pack Import Export, because that was the name of the moving side of it. That's where
Pack Import Export. Packimpex. Yeah. Okay. And also that would be if you could use it on Scrabble, that would be a very expensive word, or not expensive, a very anyway. So no, but the thing that I wanted to say was the idea. So, you know, I practiced immigration law and I studied it, and I was only an immigration lawyer for about 1.5 years, for less than 2 years. But I got into the industry as an intern, and that was my whole life in law school. So I feel like I had been in the space for much longer, even before I got my first job. You really tend to, especially if you're on the legal side, but probably really in any portion of the immigration side, that the immigration process is it's the most important thing. And it is. I mean, without a visa, you can't relocate. I mean, you need the entry, you know. But, you know, as a lawyer, even in a law firm setting, I think you're not typically brought into even the idea of the full mobility process. and a lot of people go into the immigration space thinking, I love people, I love helping people, I help them move. But the reality is, and it makes sense, it's just part of the job. You get their visa, you send them, the approval, whatever it might be. And then you say, great, so I'll talk to you in 3 years when there's a renewal, or let me know when you have, and the reality is, for that person, things have just begun. And I think as an immigration professional, even if you're just a lawyer or paralegal or whoever in an immigration process, in an immigration firm, it's good to just be aware of the fact that now there's so much more that this individual, they have to physically move, right? They have to move their stuff. If they have a family, they have to figure out what their spouse might be doing. If they have kids, where are they going to go to school? If they have pets, you got to move your pet. If you lived in a certain home, what kind of a home or neighborhood do you want to, or will you live in your, in a new destination? And then once you're there, how do you acclimate, and all these things? Get a credit card. How do you get a car loan? How do you, all these things? And so I think it's just interesting to know. My philosophy, frankly, is that, and again, I say this to my immigration law, law firm folks out there who may be listening. I think it's good for immigration lawyers to just be aware of this, and potentially even have connections to, different services and things like that. And so we'll get in a minute to, into like what Newland Chase does, and, broadly, and then we'll talk about the technology. But just generally, if you're a smaller immigration firm, you can at least still have some resources available to your clients and say, hey, when you move here, here's some ways that you can, figure out how to get a credit card or get a phone number or things like that. I just think it's good for folks to know that. It really opened my eyes when I stepped out of the just immigration bubble and realized that there's so much more. So I just think that's a really interesting insight, and really cool that you were able to actually work in both, right? You did the immigration side, and then you kind of the broader mobility, destination services, relocation management, et cetera. So I just wanted to mention that, because that was a pivotal moment for me in my career as well, to learn that there was so much more. And in fact, immigration was just the beginning.
And I think, especially people who have, been an immigration consultant, for example, for a certain amount of time, there is a tendency to forget how emotive that process can be, and why, people sometimes go, well, I don't understand why this person's getting so angry because it's, 3 days delayed. But for that person, that means, okay, now my household goods potentially cannot be shipped, or can't be offloaded, or whatever, whatever else is happening in their relocation journey. Immigration is absolutely the cornerstone of that. Until that is sorted out, nothing else can happen, and people's lives are in limbo.
That's right. Yep. And it is a human, and a lot of people go into this industry because they love working with people. But when you work on an immigration case after immigration case, you can't possibly empathize fully with everyone. It would drive you crazy. You have to separate yourself a little bit and do the work, mechanically. But then when you do that, you sort of start to forget about what people are feeling.
It's a terrible thing to say, but I think unless you're one of those exceptional people who really are, deeply empathetic, I think the role does have a bit of a shelf life, to be able to demonstrate the empathy, particularly for certain nationalities. I think people, again, people with a nice Western passport where you can go everywhere pretty much visa free, you forget how important it is to those visa nationals, how, I remember the first time I had to communicate a refusal to somebody, and the person burst out crying. And I was like, wow, it's not that bad. We'll just, reapply, I thought in my mind. And that was the first realization I had, that for this person, this was their whole life. If they didn't get this extended, it was going to be devastating for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're lucky. I mean, I feel very grateful that my family moved here, and that I've had the opportunities I've had, and that I have the passport that I have, quite honestly. I do wish I can go to Cuba more easily, but there's a few places, but so I want to take a small break just to kind of bring in just a few comments here. Oh man, there's so many great ones here. So first Ben said look forward to chat between Roman and Manpreet. Thank you, Ben. Ben is one of the few. So I went to Prague a few years ago with the International Center for International Legal Studies, which is like affiliated with AILA, I guess, and had a chance to meet Ben and so many other awesome people from around the world. And I can't wait to kind of see people again and travel And Cindy said I did okay pronouncing Gloucestershire.
Gloucestershire.
Okay. So Danielle says hi from Essex. Hi Danielle. Thank you so much for joining. Cassie says, true story. I would love my 2 daughters to grow up and be like Manpreet and your sibling. That's really sweet. Thank you. So we got Cassandra's 100%. Susan agrees your parents were clever, and also that, follow your passion, the rest will follow. Definitely. And I will say though, to your point, that's also, I don't know the best way to put this, but like in a wealthier country, that is truer, right? Like if your passion is making sweaters, you can have a decent life making and selling sweaters in the US, maybe not in or in UK or whatnot. So there's a lot of truth in this, but also I like to remind myself that I can't just go around and be like, what do you mean? In another country, like maybe even in thinking about Ukraine, where I'm from and like what's happening now, you can't just say, oh, go out and sell, artwork on the streets. You can't provide.
It's often what people say about, mothers who work. They say, well, I don't understand. Why did they have children if they were going to go to work? And I was like, well, have you ever considered that maybe they need the money? Maybe they would love to be at home with their children, but maybe they need to work.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that whole concept. I wanted to bring that out because I both agree, but also think that it's good to just, talk about the truisms there as well. Marianne says languages are essential, and is a classic. I think I did know that, Marianne, that you studied multiple languages. That's awesome. So LinkedIn user says you have 10 plus more years at Newland Chase.
This is LinkedIn user is.
Yeah, well, it's somebody who's their privacy doesn't allow them to show up. But whoever you are, you're right.
Well, I'm going to try and uncover that person at Newland Chase. That'll be my new. That'll be my new mission.
Marianne says really great advice for the length of time about being at a job. So yeah, I mean, and people, it's different for everyone, of course. And then Marianne said anyone involved in immigration should definitely live outside of their home country for at least 6 months to a year to empathize. Definitely.
I think that's true of the whole world. I think that everyone should be forced to go and live, not just outside of their own country, but in a country that they cannot speak the language, because it humbles you in a way that you will never forget. I think.
And it allows you to remember that people live differently. And I think there's also a glorification of like people from the West going to like quote unquote poorer countries. And you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that those are invalid or bad experiences. I mean, you open your eyes however you want to open your eyes. But I just think that it shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm from America, let me go live in X for a year and then my life will change, I don't know. Yeah.
It's that unconscious bias, but often because we're native English speakers, you speak to somebody who struggles to express themselves as well because it's not their native language, and you have a tendency, or at least before you experienced it yourself, you have a tendency of thinking they're not as bright as you, and then you think, hang on, they're doing all of this in their non-native language. Could I do that in their language? Probably not. Right.
What a huge that's a huge reminder. Immigrants, and what's Hamilton, right? The Hamilton play. There's the famous line, "Immigrants, we get the job done." And it's I was lucky enough to see it here in New York, and like the crowd went wild, during that line. And that line has been sort of glorified a bit, but it's, you come and sing that song in a city full of immigrants and nation full of immigrants, especially at a time where there were and continue to be challenges around people's perception of immigrants and immigration. And it's like, guys, immigrants built so much and continue to build so much that it's good to I love shouting out immigrants. So that's that. Okay. So thank you everybody for your comments. I know, and to your point, we've now spoken for 50 minutes and we haven't even gotten to what you're doing now.
Got to the amazing ImmiSMART, which Katya will kill me if I don't mention. And
so let's talk about what you do now. So I know you came back to Newland Chase now, of course, in different capacity than what you were doing at Emigra, of course, and prior. Can you talk a little bit about what you do and sort of what Newland Chase does as a company? And part of this is also educating me, because I know it's a large organization. You have a lot of different service providers and professionals in UK and Canada, all over the world. There's also the CIBT arm, which is has gone through a lot of acquisitions, and so I also have been trying to wrap my head around what the organization does. Maybe there's no quick and dirty, version of it.
There is. It's actually very, very simple. It does the full end-to-end spectrum of visa and immigration services, including document services, so passports, legalizations, anything that you need in that department. But in a quick and dirty explanation kind of way, that is what the organization does. And within that, there are many services, many products, and when we think about the technology part of it, so I mentioned, or rather you mentioned for me, that I'm responsible for global strategy and services and products at Newland Chase. Some of those products and services are the ones you would expect any immigration firm to deliver. Somebody needs a business visa to go from the UK to China, we'll manage that. Somebody else needs a document legalized, we'll do that. Somebody else will, they're going on a traditional assignment and need a work and residence permit, and that's what we do, and we try like everything. So you say it's a large organization, and I think when we had a really brief chat and before today, and our line didn't work very well, but I think I started a sentence something along the lines of, it is a big organization, but, and then we cut off, and the end of that sentence was, in terms of numbers and size, yes, it's a large organization, but it actually has a very small organization feel about it. And I mean that in the warmest possible way, in the sense that, I worked for the behemoths when I worked for a relocation management company, and it has its own benefits and good things about it. But what I've learned about myself over the course of all the jobs I've had is that I love working in that small company feel, because you're so agile. Things get done quickly, decisions get done quickly. There's so much more innovation, and that's kind of brought us to the technology products that we've developed. ImmiSMART was like a speck of an idea that came off the back of a prospect mentioning a need, and before my time, but the company went back and said, that prospect asked for something that would help them have greater visibility over both the visa and the immigration sides of their business, because at the moment they don't really have that visibility of their entire mobile population. And also, we're concerned that we don't really know whether people are traveling compliantly. So that was sort of that little crumb that fed an enormous now an amazing product, which I would call it a talent mobility portal. So it's not just a pre-travel assessment. Most of our clients and prospects, when they've come to us and started talking to us about their needs, they're looking for a travel compliance assessment, either something they want to build into their travel approval workflow, or they just simply want to make sure that they know where all their people are and that they are traveling compliantly. But it does a lot more than that. It is has an amazing suite of management information, reporting, dashboard analytics that help organizations manage all sorts of things. There's a lot of intelligence around spend. Where are they spending their money? How could they reduce their spend? Where is their risk? Where are their compliance gaps? How do they close them? How do they identify potential tax and social security risks? So there's a lot more to it than just a pre-travel approval. And again, from that, we've evolved the product to the extent, I think everything at Newland Chase is about the customer experience. And and that's every product and service we have, but particularly in technology, it is around how do we make the delivery of our core services, which will always remain those visa, document and immigration services. How do we make this a seamless experience for our clients and customers? And so all the developments of the product really come from, we have a vision. We obviously have a product roadmap like every other provider out there, but we listen to our clients and customers and our prospects, and we're agile enough to sort of make that happen. It's a fully owned proprietary tool, so luckily we have some incredibly bright people, one of which you've pointed out is on this call, so I have to give a massive shout out to Katja, who is senior product manager at Newland Chase, and ImmiSMART really is the vision and the evolution of this particular product over the last 12 months is a testament to her hard work and her tenacity in making sure it delivers the best, not just to our existing clients, but it is in my old job where I was responsible for global supply chain, and of course I'm biased, but I looked at a lot of these kinds of products, a lot of them, and I would say it's probably one of the most robust tools out there. It started off as a visa immigration, then into posted worker, A1 sort of compliance, and now has this entire suite of tax functionality that can be used. And because of the CIBT visas, strength and privileged place in the market and relationships with travel management companies, we've also integrated a kind of entire vendor ecosystem. Our industry is not good, has never been good, irrespective of whether you're in immigration, relocation, household goods, wherever you sit in the mobility industry. We're not great with technology, and I think it is great to see now the industry realizing that, and realizing that for the customer to have a great experience, we cannot be asking them for the same information 5, 6, 7 times across the life of their mobility journey. So, being able to, integrate, that travel or compliance assessment into the travel workflow is, it definitely makes that entire experience a lot more seamless for the end client.
Now, does ImmiSMART apply, this sort of like tax and compliance and all that logic in certain parts of certain countries? Because one of the, or is it global, or, is it that you...
100 countries worldwide. So, to all intents and purposes, for the mobility industry where people regularly move to, it's a global tool. And yeah, all of the logic, so our in-house experts are responsible for the knowledge that flows through into driving those assessment results. And we've again thought long and hard from a customer client perspective of like, what, if they buy a tool like this, they want an automated output to whatever their question is. And if that question, if you're a travel manager or a general business traveler, you want to know, do I need a visa? Do I not need a visa? And if I do need one, what do I have to do? And how do I click to get it? It is really around, making it as seamless as possible from that perspective.
Yeah, because one of the things I always thought was really fascinating is once you start going down the rabbit hole of all the data that you need and all of the ancillary processes within the mobility, journey of an individual, now you start touching on tax, and you start touching on family members, and you start touching on different compliance requirements if you're on a temporary work visa, and then there's the immigration side and all this, and so it feels so daunting. I mean, there's so much to it. Yeah.
I mean, the when you think what we, I say we, but anybody that has this sort of technology to take incredibly complex, immigration, visa, immigration, posted worker laws, and use that logic to build, or rather turn that complex knowledge into algorithms that will drive an automated output that will tell you, okay, based on your profile, you're this nationality, you hold these documents, you're going from this place to that place, we need to consider that you're doing X, Y, Z, and then to be able to spit out an automated assessment. And our commitment to our to our clients is that 80% of the time they will get an instantaneous response. It is complex though, so there's always going to be, that 20% that will fall out where you need a human being. And it's all about enabling the experience, not removing the human touch. Where they can get an automated assessment, they will get it most of the time. But if they need that additional discussion, hand-holding, consultation, then absolutely our experts will provide that too.
I think that's so important because there's always, in the legal tech discussion generally, and even specifically in our industry, there's this idea that once you introduce technology, you eradicate the need for a human being. And most people in the technology space are saying that's not true. It's never going to be true. You're automating parts of the journey. If you can automate more of it, well, you're going to be able to spend more time not worrying about the administrative or repetitive steps of the process, but really, focus and key in on and spend the right required amount of time on the 20% or whatever it might be where they need a human touch. That because otherwise you get the opposite side where you have, like you go to the doctor's office, the doctor sees you for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're on less than 10 minutes, right? You're in and out of that office. And I agree. I think it is all about enabling the experience, but not, let the humans focus on the bits that matter, like the empathy that we talked about earlier, to be able to pick up the phone and reassure somebody when something has been processing for longer than they thought it would be. But, if you're a company today that isn't investing in technology, then the reality is you're going to become probably extinct in the not too distant future. But it is not the be all and end all. It is the ways, it's a way to the means, the means of delivering something that is meaningful to another human being.
I'll never forget when I was practicing, I had a client. The company was a client, but it was an individual whose visa wasn't sure, something about his H-1B visa. And I remember I spent, I think, an hour, maybe 45 minutes on the phone with this person. And not once during that time did I personally think to myself, oh, I got to, I didn't rush this person off the phone. And I remember thinking like, wow. And they felt better after the call. I couldn't do anything because I'm not the government, but what I could do was make the person feel better about their options if this didn't work out, et cetera. And I was just thinking, I remember thinking to myself like, man, I'm going to be here till 7 today because I just got off the phone. And I think what I just did was very valuable to the experience of working with the law firm, but I now have to be here because I still have this other paperwork and whatnot to finish.
You've got billable hours, right? So somehow.
Actually, no. A lot of times in immigration law, no. I mean, this is a really wonderful thing about immigration law and why I think it's so ripe for more technology. And that's why I push this conversation so much. Immigration lawyers in the US, and I think probably around the world, tend to, I think, bill flat fee, which means there should be an incentive to automate as much as you can and focus your human hours on the things that A, can't be automated, and then B, shouldn't be automated, right? Like the conversation with the stressed out, assignee or potential immigrant. I just remember that moment where I was like, I wish I could just go home now because I feel like I just did my job. I got off the phone with somebody who's happy, but I have this paperwork and stuff. And I think that's what, it seems like, ImmiSMART focuses on, and I think that's where the immigration industry should focus, is how do we build more technology and integrate more tools into the workflow to automate the administrative, the paperwork, the repetitive stuff, and have the time and the mental energy, frankly, as providers to talk to our clients and solve their problems.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, I think we've got to a point in time, irrespective of where you work, where you just kind of send emails to each other all the time. People don't even like, if my phone rings, I'm like, what is that? My phone rang? Even, obviously my personal phone rings sometimes, but if my work phone rings, I'm stunned. I'm like, somebody actually bothered to pick up a telephone.
Yeah. Do you think it's an emergency immediately?
Well, it depends where the call's coming in from.
Right.
Yes. I growing up as an immigrant, I don't know whether you had this in your family. If there was a phone call in the middle of the night, it was always bad news.
Yeah.
Because it was probably somebody calling from the other side of the world, and it wasn't going to be good. So no, I don't typically always panic, but yeah, depending on how repeatedly I may get a phone call from my mother, I then begin to think, well, maybe this is important. Maybe I do need to get off this call and call her back.
Right. That's true. Yeah. And there's a whole nother conversation around how technology in the workplace, forget about the client facing side, but as the provider, when you can rely on technology to do more of your work, you can potentially have a more flexible lifestyle. You can take an hour during the day and have an important phone call and not feel like you're just disrupting your entire, work process. So this is awesome. And I think, if you have a few more minutes, I'd love to just ask a couple more questions from a technology perspective. Like you said, it's a proprietary tool. Newland Chase has built it, owns it, runs it, supplies it to your clients. Do you have any integration? I mean, is there any opportunity or thought around like a large organization building an internal tool still can't build everything, or if you can, it'll take forever? What are your thoughts on, from whatever you can share, even a tool like ImmiSMART connecting to other tools, be they immigration specific, or maybe something like a Calendly, like a calendar tool that you don't have to build?
No, I think it's a necessity. ImmiSMART aside, I think generally in the mobility space, it goes back to that question of, how do we make the experience for the actual user a pleasant one, and the service, as seamless as possible. It's the data flow, in my view. It is the ensuring that nobody's asked at any point, whether it's the provider or whether it's the actual user, consumer of the service, they shouldn't have to do, there's not all of this redundant work of re-inputting. The way we approach it at Newland Chase is really through integrations, API connectivity, two-way data flow. We have that with our customers, and again, going back to CIBT, we have those very privileged relationships with travel management companies. So most companies have a travel management company helping with, at least before the pandemic, there are tens of thousands of travelers, booking their flights, booking their hotels, and as part of that, they need visas. So having that flow of information that potentially starts, in the customer's HR system or whatever internal system they may have at the company, either going to the travel management company and then to us, or coming to us and then going to the travel management company, whichever way it needs to be configured. We're firm believers in, having that integrated ecosystem.
So the idea would be that if you're working with a client, there are capabilities or opportunities to connect with other tools that they're using, so that they don't have to manually move data from one place to another.
Absolutely, yeah. It is very easily configurable to connect into other systems.
How do you feel about it? And I asked this because of the precedents that CIBT, I guess, has set maybe for the organization through acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that it doesn't happen often in the industry, and one thing that I think is regrettable is that acquisitions, I think, give people an incentive to build and to tinker and to create, because there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not easy to just start a company from scratch. And I think it's great that there are some larger organizations, at least, that are willing to explore that and make acquisitions. That being said, none of this information is ever public. This isn't like Google acquiring somebody for $500 million. It makes the news. It's on their public. These are obviously smaller companies. We're a smaller industry, et cetera. But I think the fact that it exists is still great. Do you feel that organizations like yours and others should be encouraging, let's say, startups to come into this world? Or, I don't know. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the whole startup acquisition side?
So I think, and irrespective of which business you're in, there's room for everybody to bring the best of what they can offer to the market, right? And then the market will choose. So I've always thought there's, competition actually makes us better. and makes us think more about the decisions we're making. And absolutely, I think having startups in this space, especially because I do think Newland Chase, CIBT are very unique in this because of all the acquisitions they have made over the years. They've had to think about meaningfully about how do we make these pieces fit together, what works, what doesn't work. But if organizations haven't sort of grown in that way, you tend to end up with quite a stale kind of, this is the way we always did it and this is the way it's going to happen. So having those new players out there and having a passion to do something differently, and Ben Sukir is probably the best example of this. He's always trying to shake things up. He was like, just because this is the way it's always been done doesn't mean this is the way it should always be done. And and that, I think, just helps everyone, really.
I wish I could take that little soundbite and echo it all over the industry. No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, part of the reason for the show was to show and highlight and showcase the different companies that are in the technology space. Of course, some of them are organizations like Newland Chase, CIBT, that are now a large organization. There, you're kind of a conglomerate of some small companies, some purely homegrown, everything put together. But there are, of course, a lot of just sort of discrete, distinct, small organizations out there doing different things in the industry. I think we have to highlight that and we have to showcase it. And I think we have to continue to promote it, because innovation can't just come from within. It can, but you need players to come in and do something different, maybe who were not even in the industry, and say, hey, I came from electric cars and we did X really, really well. Why don't we do Y in this industry the same way?
Exactly. And if you want to build everything from scratch, it's always going to take you significantly longer. And by the time you've built it, it's probably obsolete. So, in my organization, we do that through acquisition. Recently acquired Visilio, which is a tech company that to help us on our journey to, to enhance all of the offerings we have and all the things that we want to do in the tech space. So, yeah, I definitely strongly encourage, this industry needs help when it comes to tech. Let's just put it that way. And the more people we have in it helping us along, the better it will be for all of us.
What do you think, just as one of my final questions, what do you think is sort of the future of technology in the industry? There's always been, case management has always been around, and obviously visa kind of, I don't know what you would even call it, but sort of travel visa, business visa, inquiry kind of tools have been around. But I think there are probably still a lot that we maybe don't even think about that can be automated, or I don't know. Where do you think the industry is going in the tech side of things?
We're slow movers in mobility, but I think over the last couple of years that penny has dropped. And, even in my old organization, much larger, the focus really was on, okay, well, what can we take away from our, incredibly talented consultants? That's not really them. It's an administrative function that could be done, by a bot, quite frankly. Expense processing based on a policy, for example. That's what the policy says. Is expense approved or not? Why does a human being have to do that? That can very easily be automated. So, I think it's a natural evolution of things that probably has started much later in this industry than it has in many others. But I will say that this industry, in my view, and there may be many others that disagree with me, just the nature of it means that you cannot take away the human.
Right.
The human element is critical. The technology is not the be all and the end all. It is a means to an end, which is what we said earlier. Let the human beings focus on the areas that matter, that add value, that deliver, things that technology cannot. Helping that person through a difficult situation because they've had a rejection when they didn't expect it. Current crisis in the Ukraine. This industry has a wonderful, I suppose, sense of community about it, more so than many other industries. And, no technology can replace the warmth of and the immediate action of human beings reaching, in our organization this weekend, we have people volunteering to help, Ukrainians who want to come to the UK but don't understand the weird and wonderful legislation our country has put together. They do this day in, day out, and they're giving of their time to help. Technology can't do that. Even if you had some technology, they wouldn't have been able to, take this new legislation that's just arrived and automate it and give an automated output. Only human beings can do that.
That's a great point. It can't. Sometimes it doesn't move fast enough, but that's okay. Other times it doesn't move fast enough, and that could be the difference between, life or death, or a border being open, a humanitarian corridor opening up for 24 hours. Well, they need to know where they're going.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, and a great reminder too that, again, for people who do think that technology can't, we can't, it's going to take away our jobs. It's not. It's just, it's going to automate the things that we've hated to do anyway. This whole time.
And it gives us the time to do all the things that perhaps, we've never had a chance to. I mean, the pandemic has kind of done that. More people are working from home, and just having, like I say, being able to go in the middle of your day to do something that you wouldn't have been able to do because you were commuting to an office. That's kind of the way I see, technology. I'm not scared of it stealing a job. I'm looking forward to the day that I can have a 3-day week as a result of technology enhancements.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah, exactly. So senior people at Newland Chase are watching. Let's work for the 3-day week.
Yeah, there's a lot of experimentation going on around the world with 3-day, 4-day weeks, and a lot of different work arrangements. And yeah, we're in a really interesting time right now in the world, both good and bad. And it'll be really fascinating to look back on this in 5 to 10 years and think about how it's different from early 2000s. This has been really fascinating. I appreciate the insight, especially that you've shared around sort of your view on technology and around acquisitions, and like sometimes buy versus build is important. Other times you have to build because it's coming from a suggestion, as you mentioned earlier, from a prospect or from an existing client. So thank you for that. I like to end as much as I can on sort of an interesting or maybe fun note. I'm curious, especially because you're clearly a polyglot, you've lived all over the world. This may be a hard question to answer, but do you have a favorite word in any language? And I say this because there are some words in some languages that are so unique and kind of, that people have that favorite word. I don't have one. I don't. And I know a few languages, but I wanted to see if you might have one.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's a favorite word, but there are words that, so the French word bisou, and I don't know whether it kind of means a warm kiss or hug, It's like, but friends will say to each other when they say goodbye. Like, it's basically the kisses that they do when you walk into a room or when you're leaving. And when I lived in Japan, for example, it was kind of this thing I wanted to say to my Japanese friends when they left me. And I was like, where is this word in this language? So I think in every language you'll realize that there's this word that cannot be replaced in another language, and you're looking for it. So I wouldn't say it was my favorite word. There's so many amazing words out there, but I think it's those little words that just are not translatable into other languages. Those are my favorite words.
Yeah, I love that. What is it? Bisou?
Bisou. Yeah.
Bisou. Yeah. It's the transliteration of the hugs and the kisses.
Yeah, basically.
That's cool. Well, I want to bid a bisou to everybody who is
perfect usage of it. There you
go. Yeah, exactly. Manpreet, thank you. This was just a wonderful conversation, and it was really nice to learn about you and your journey. And I think you've had a really interesting one because you've seen a lot of sides of the industry for a number of years each, and I think it feels like it's culminated into something cool because now you're at the helm of, or at least supporting, a technology product, and it's great to have all the insights from both the immigration side and the broader mobility side to be able to continue to build that out. So thank you. Thank you again for staying so late. I appreciate it. And for all of your answers and the great conversation. So I appreciate it. And bisous.
Bisous to you too. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And, especially given that, you've got a lot going on in your personal life and this crisis has personally impacted you. Thank you so much for, letting the show go on, I suppose.
Yeah. Show must go on. We have to. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Manpreet. Thank you, everybody, for being here, especially for all you folks who are actually also joining from the UK or anywhere else where it's a little bit later. I appreciate you. If you had your wine or beer or whatever your beverage or snack of choice, I hope it was. I hope this was a really good discussion and as interesting of a discussion for you as it was for me. I'm excited to be back. And kind of doing the show again, and having taken a break and traveling in Italy for a bit. There's a lot happening in the world right now. It feels weird to be indulging in a podcast when there's a war going on. I suppose there are always wars going on. I was born in Ukraine, so for me it feels much more direct. But I think, as Manpreet said, sort of the show does have to go on. So thank you all for being here, for your amazing support and comments and during this episode, and join me next week for another show as we kind of kick things back off. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Stay safe, hug your loved ones, all the good stuff. Okay, bisous.